Welcome to Off Hours, a conversation between John Edwards and Chris Manning.
So you feeling a little more rested, Chris?
Yeah, I've avoided the ridiculous travel before this episode, so it's been a little bit easier to sleep on a regular basis the past couple of weeks.
Nice. This is our very first episode with a sponsor.
Yeah, we're fortunate that the Santa Fe Symposium has decided to sponsor this episode of Off Hours. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the middle of the show, but we're happy to have our first sponsor joining us here.
So we'll kick things off with a little bit of follow-up, as usual. I had asked you about some software you use on your computer, and it turns out one of those pieces of software is no longer under active development.
Yeah, that's right. It looks like Control Plane is no longer being developed, which is too bad.
Yeah, so if you were hoping to make use of that, we apologize for bringing it up without first checking whether it's actually still being actively worked on. So it is unfortunately an abandoned piece of software. Maybe it'll come back in the future, but with the way things are heading for Mac OS, it's unlikely that there is much of a future left for it in terms of the way that the system's being locked down.
Yeah, it does currently work still. So I know that as of High Sierra, it still works. I haven't tried putting Mojave on my machine yet, so I'm not sure if it's going to continue functioning under Mojave. But even with the sandboxing rules of High Sierra, it is still able to function just fine. So as of right now, it is still out there on the internet. You can still find it. I suspect there are some things in the system that don't work properly, and you may run into some issues with that. Although, if there's anyone out there who's curious, I think the code is out there on GitHub, isn't it?
That I did not look into.
Okay, I think it's possible the code is out there in the world, and if you were interested in forking it, you wanted a project to work on in your off hours, then that might be something for you to try. But unfortunately, it is not under active development. So if there's anyone out there who has a reasonable alternative to Control Plane, something that easily allows you to change up settings on your machine without intervention, something that could use either networks or location services to change up various services on your machine, I'd love to hear about it, because I'm always interested in improving the way my system works, and especially being able to make it more secure while I'm on the road.
Another quick bit of follow-up. I mentioned offhand that the Spirograph was a toy of the 80s. And that's simply because I was in diapers in the 80s and I'm oblivious to anything that came before that. It turns out Spirograph was first brought to market in 1965, so it was a couple decades off there.
And if you're interested in something like the Spirograph and you want to buy something that's maybe a little bit more complicated than a Spirograph, something that has a little bit more customization potential, then Joe Friedman has a cycloid drawing machine available. And he was actually at the OTI Symposium over in Seattle when I was there at the end of September. So I had a chance to see one of his latest machines, and they're relatively simple in terms of the construction. He's using thin board that he's laser cut. And so he's got his gears laser cut out of sort of a thin board. And it works quite well. And it was quite impressive seeing what he's able to do with it. I know he ran a Kickstarter a few years ago for it, and I think he was talking about having a new batch of these out there. And I think there was a new machine that he was bringing out. So the idea of the Spirograph excites you, but you find it a little bit limiting, then you might want to check out what Joe Friedman's doing.
In another vein of machinery and invention, you sent me a video this week.
I ran into a YouTube channel recently called Machine Thinking. I came across it from the Making It podcast. The guys that are on that were talking about it. And the particular video that I came across was him discussing the Vaucanson metal lathe. And it looks like this was the first lathe made entirely out of metal, and certainly the first lathe that starts to approximate what our modern machine lathes are doing in terms of having a carriage and a lead screw. His was designed in, I think, 1751, and it is in a museum in Paris that is dedicated to machinery and industry. And this video has a good overview of what the machine is and what it looks like. So if you're curious to see what some of these early lathes look like, this was a good video talking about that. And it looks like this particular channel, the Machine Thinking channel, is quite interesting. he also has an ongoing series where he's building a replica of James Watt's micrometer. So if you're interested in seeing what that would have looked like and seeing the process of somebody making one in a modern machine shop, then he has a series going right now that's talking about that.
And I found the video nicely paralleled Simon Winchester's book, The Perfectionists, that we talked about a few episodes back.
Yeah, and there's obviously a lot of stories like this where, there were people sort of in parallel developing these technologies and these ideas of precision, and of course, you can't have all of these stories show up in a book, so it's nice to see somebody covering a slightly different side of the same coin in terms of what these people were doing and inventing.
Now, while you were off globe-trotting these past couple of weeks, I had the opportunity to have a tour around a machine shop, part of Lee Valley Tools, which we mentioned back in episode 1 as the company that you purchased one of your first pen kits from. I got an interesting tour behind the scenes of how things actually operate there as part of Veritas, which is the manufacturing division or arm of the company that was founded by Leonard Lee.
Yeah, I'm a little jealous of this this tour that you're able to get on. I haven't been able, despite being a dedicated and loyal customer of Veritas and Lee Valley over the years, and having lived very close by to their facilities, I have never had a chance to get a tour of their manufacturing. And the other one that I want to get a tour of is their tool collection. They've got an amazing antique tool collection there. But yeah, I'm curious to hear a little bit about their manufacturing, because I've spoken to a few people who've worked there and a few people who've visited. So I'm curious to hear what you have to say about it and what the tour was like.
It was quite the operation, and nice to know that something like that exists so locally right here in the capital. I guess it'd be suitable to give a little bit of background on the company. It was founded by Leonard Lee in his mid-30s. He was previously working for government, and he decided to branch out on his own. He started selling essentially kits to make a wood-burning stove. So all these cast iron parts that he would offer by mail order, and then just branched out from there, offering more and more tools and interesting little knickknacks, and then eventually started making tools himself. So Veritas is the manufacturing division, and that's the Latin word for truth. One of the things that really stuck out to me when I first walked in was the code of quality. It's very prominent there, right in the entrance, and then at numerous points all around the workshop. And for any woodworkers out there who are familiar with the planes and chisels and different wood shaping tools that Lee Valley is renowned for, you'll know that they do live up to a very high code of quality, and I really admire what they aspire to there in their manufacturing and the level of quality that they endeavor to adhere to.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of their tools. They're certainly not the cheapest tools that are available on the market for woodworking, but they're all very well thought out. And one of the things I've always been impressed with, along with their attention to detail when they've manufactured them, many of them are based off of old tools. I mentioned their impressive tool collection, historical tool collection. Many of their tools are based off of older tools, and they've gone ahead and taken the best parts of the old tools and then worked on improving them and adding different functionality to them or improving the functionality of them. So I've been a big fan of their tools from day one.
A quote I heard once from Lee is that he sees or endeavors to treat all of his customers as friends. And an interesting thing I sort of read between the lines on that, too, knowing some other anecdotes and stories about the way that he would handle various situations that sprung up over the years, is that friends aren't always right. So the customer isn't necessarily always right, but he would always stand behind the products and be there to do you a solid. And I think the success of the company is testament to that. The whole reason they started making tools was just because he was frustrated with the quality of what he was able to get, and he was frustrated that he couldn't, like a tool that was say 50 years old or 100 years old, and he had passed down through the family or been able to find on a farm somewhere. He was frustrated that modern tools weren't up to the same level of quality and would not endure in the same way. So they started out by manufacturing just 2 carpenter's planes, and then they've expanded to do a whole lot more from there. And the manufacturing facility actually occupies the old building that the store and warehouse both used to fit in. So when you first walk in, it's actually still set up in much the same way that the original sales area would have been set up. And the person showing me around said it's always a little surreal for him walking through there because he can remember being in there as a kid with his dad, and he can like point and be like, I remember my dad standing right there and picking out such and such a tool. And he now operates a number of the grinders in the back area there. But there's still a pegboard up on the wall, or pegboard's the wrong word, but the mounting board that tools would have been put up on, and the odd little sign and things. And that front area now is primarily for the final assembly and quality control checks, where they get things packaged up and ready to go out. And it also houses a somewhat antiquated but still very effective laser. So it turns out all of the engraving on their chisels are all done by a giant Beamer FXL22, which still does the job just fine. And I was impressed impressed to learn that their markings are all done on a laser, because they've been doing it for so long that way, but also because some of these engravings and markings are very deep.
If you're using a laser for engraving, all you need to do is just keep going at it for a little while, and it'll eventually, cut deeper. So it's just a question of how long you're willing to spend on it. I know that was one of the complaints that they had at the assaying office in London. Often they offer different depths of engraving when they're doing the laser hall marking. They were complaining a little bit about the length of time it takes to engrave some of these deeper stamps. So yeah, as long as you're willing to spend the time, it's the laser will engrave deep enough for you.
Also in the front area there, as I mentioned, there's a quality control space, and of course Mirutoyo was well represented there. Brands we both would highly recommend for their measuring tools. There are a number of QC areas sprinkled throughout the building, and one of them had what is absolutely one of the largest precision calipers I've ever seen for Mirutoyo. This thing I would think you could measure the axle on a train with it if you wanted to.
Now, was this a vernier caliper, or was this
Yes.
a micrometer?
Most of the Mirutoyo ones I saw around were all the verniers. An interesting piece of equipment from Mirutoyo I had never seen before was the surf test, which does surface finish analysis. It can measure 19 different surface roughness parameters. So that was in that final QC stage, and then they'll check the surface roughness on the various sharp edges that they are shipping out.
Yeah, that's a level of sort of QC work I've never bothered doing, because for me, I can look at a piece and I know whether it's polished or not, right? Because I tend to be going to a higher level of polish than what they're looking for, but I'm also doing those polishes by hand. And when you're machining a surface finish and you're trying to get to, not only the surface finish that you want, but also the actual dimension that you want, you're trying to hit your tolerances, then these surface finish testers are kind of important, because it will tell you whether you've actually reached the surface finish that you need. And in the case of a woodworking tool, that's going to have a huge impact on how smooth it runs across the wood, and also what kind of marks it's going to leave on the wood as well, because you don't want the base of your plane to be rough and leaving a mark on wood when you're running it across there.
There were, of course, a number of surface plates littered throughout the building as well for various measurement checks. And an interesting tidbit that I was previously unaware of, as I've never needed to work with anything heavy enough to warrant it, is that beyond chipping, a secondary function of the chamfered edge on a surface plate is to rest a particularly heavy object against that chamfer, and then to tilt them gently onto the surface to avoid damaging the surface plate when setting something particularly heavy down onto it.
It's important when you're putting things on surface plates that you're careful about how they go on. First off, the cleaning them is extremely important because you have to keep everything super clean. So you'll often see people when they're using surface plates properly that they're always wiping the surface plate and wiping the bottom of whatever it is that they're putting on it. And then you'll also see that they're gently sort of rolling it on to the surface plate. They're not trying to put it down flat, and that's important when you're putting things onto a surface plate. You want to make sure that it's actually on there properly and that nothing's trapped under it. And especially when you're putting something particularly heavy on there, you have to be careful.
And then, of course, they also had a number of CMMs, which are coordinate measuring machines that'll take a number of measurements on a finished product or something that's in the process of being finished, just to make sure that everything is falling within the parameters that they have set out. And that would be another reason too that they have a product like the surf test, is because while you or I could visually inspect something for a one-off piece, when you're mass producing something, you want to ensure a certain level of consistency. And whereas the sort of check by eye we may be doing provides a very subjective measure, things like the surf test and the CMMs give a more objective measure of quality.
Just like the Lord Chancellor that we talked about on the episode about the perfectionists, they were looking for the same kind of thing where they wanted an objective measure of whether something was actually made properly or not. Now, these CMMs that you were looking at, are these manually controlled CMMs or are these automated CMMs?
So they've a mix. So one of the rooms had ones that were manually controlled, and then another room had one that was much more automated. Now, these weren't up and running and in action at the time that I was there, so I didn't actually get to see them running, but I did get just a brief demonstration of the sorts of measurements they would be taking with them.
Now, did they talk at all about the tolerances that they're working to?
We didn't really dive into that because it varies so much from product to product. I mean, you're talking about some of their chisels. They're going to be grinding to a mirror finish, and then you've got other things that would just be like a screw or a little adapter or a clip that just makes some task in the garden or around the house easier.
They do make a number of different things. Their little machinist toys are kind of fun. They've got some little puzzles that sort of bolt puzzles. Those obviously don't have very high tolerances, but I was thinking more along the lines of something like their planes, because the planes are certainly some of the more impressive items that they manufacture. The quality on those is very high, and the repeatability on them must be quite high. So I'm just curious as to what sort of tolerances they work to for their plane manufacturing.
Yeah, I don't have any hard numbers, but I do know that so they don't do any of the hardening or tempering on site. That's all shipped out and done in the US and then comes back to them. And so when that process is done, you more often than not going to have a little bit of warpage that occurs in the metal because it's a lot of stress and change that's happening very rapidly. So very rarely does the metal stay perfectly flat and true. So it'll go to the grinders, and then they'll have a certain amount of tolerance that they have to play within to eliminate that arcing that may have occurred or deformation in the metal. And if they're not able to eliminate it, then those pieces are scrapped. Or scrapped is the wrong word, because they tend to find a use for everything. Every little offcut and thing that doesn't quite work out gets repurposed into a brand new tool. And then, I mean, they have little tiny planes that are about the size of your finger. So like nothing goes to waste. They make use of all the materials.
I'm actually a bit frustrated with how efficient they have become, because back in the day when I was living nearby, they used to sell their offcuts from their manufacturing. So they used to sell brass and steel offcuts, usually either round bar or hexagonal bar. And most of the pieces were sort of 12 to 16 inches long. And they were selling them for less than scrap price. Beautiful material that they were using in their manufacturing. Some of it was stainless steel, some of it was 12L14, a lot of really nice brass. And I used to buy, chunks of it when I went in there because they had them at all different sizes, all different diameters. And it was a great way of getting sort of inexpensive small pieces for being able to do things. So I was using them a lot for making fixtures and mandrels and things like that. And then I went in there one day and I was looking around for the pile of offcuts, and I was told that now they had figured out how to actually use those short lengths, those sort of 12-inch lengths that they were selling off in the store, and they had figured out how to use even more of it. And I guess they had upgraded to some newer machines that could actually grip smaller pieces of material. So I was a little frustrated when they became that efficient, because I lost my source of inexpensive offcuts when that happened.
Yeah, they had a number of Swiss-style lathes, they're CNC lathes, just whirring away there, spitting out tiny little pieces from offcuts. So nothing goes to waste. There's a bygone era. It was really neat to see some of the chisels and the process that goes through, because I've never really thought of what goes into making a chisel, but they start from round bar. So it'll be turned on a lathe, then jump over to a mill or a 5-axis CNC to take more shape. Then it goes off for hardening and tempering, and then it comes back and it gets ground, and then they have a whole series of lapping machines, very similar to the sorts of machines that I've seen in Swiss factories for lapping of jewels and crystals and things like that. And they're in the process of updating those, or more or less hacking them to make them easier to use, because they have a series that are old school. They'll actually put weights down on top of the blades that are being lapped, and they have one other one that they've rigged up to function pneumatically. And to the best of my knowledge, the particular laps that they are using were being manufactured just one province over in Quebec, but the company that was making them is no longer in business. So they are now sort of taking where that company left things and then improving on it. Another thing I thought was clever about the way that they handle their stock metal is that it was all centralized within the workshop. So everything is built out around that. So it was never too far of a walk to go and get more material to be able to feed into the machines to keep them whirring away and producing parts.
Yeah, that's something I've seen a few factory tours so far. If you follow John Saunders on YouTube, he runs a YouTube channel called NYC CNC. He's someone I've followed for a number of years now. He actually started out running a little tag mill in his apartment in his bedroom in New York City, and he's now running a job shop in Ohio. And he's actually got quite an impressive little shop, and his YouTube channel is excellent as a destination if you're looking to learn how to machine, particularly CNC machining. And in his travels, he does a lot of tours of facilities and to sort of film them and see what other people are doing. And he's done a couple of great tours of factories, including a few sort of local to him. There was one, I'll have to see if I can find exactly which one it was that I'm thinking of. Can't remember the company name now, but they had built their custom building recently to move all their manufacturing into, and they were very intentional about how they laid out the factory. And one of the things that was important for them was the flow of material, where it got dropped off at the bay doors from their suppliers, and then how it moved through machining into the sort of the final QC and packaging area. If I remember correctly, they were manufacturing vices for CNC machines, and you're starting from raw castings that are quite large and might weigh 100+ pounds. So you don't want that material to need to travel very far from where it gets delivered into the factory. You want the first sort of area that it comes across to be sort of the first level of machining that it works on. So, and they had mentioned that the improvement of layout, the way they had changed the layout and the flow of manufacturing in their facility had a huge impact on how quickly they could manufacture things. I think they were also coming from a couple of different buildings and consolidating into one. So they used to store material in one building and then bring it to another building for the initial machining, and then go off to another building, and it was a nightmare. So that can have a huge impact on how efficiently you're manufacturing goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ideally, you want to be able to move things through as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And another thing that needs to be taken into consideration is being able to find things when you need them. So, another aspect of their setup that I found interesting is that they have an automated storage and retrieval system for all of their CNC bits and other tools and things that they need to be able to locate quickly and that are also somewhat valuable. So you don't want someone walking out the door with one. So they have this system known as the Auto Crib from DGI Supply, which is a subsidiary of Dual. It's basically an industrial vending machine. You go up to it and you scan your card or punch in an ID. You tell it what part you want. You pull it out. You weigh it to verify for the machine that you've taken the correct thing, and so that it knows how much it should weigh when you go to put it back. And that way someone always knows exactly where a particular bit that they may need is. So it'd be like, oh, John Doe had this the last time. I'm just going to go see if he's done with it or get a different one from the machine otherwise, or they'll tell you what's in stock. It reminded me of a much larger system I saw at Rolex that's made by Remstar, and it's used for parts storage and retrieval. But this was the Auto Crib is definitely more vending machine size, whereas the one at Rolex is a multi-story unit where you as the user are only exposed to a very small fraction of the parts at a time. So it's kind of like walking up to a counter and a drawer will light up for the particular part that you keyed in. But when you key in a part, essentially this portion of the wall in front of you would move up and down a little bit like the opening sequence in Wall-E, the movie from Pixar, where the little robot is off collecting trash and sorting and organizing things, and he's got that wall in his little hideout or house that will move and store and sort and organize various things. The very handy systems for keeping on top of a plethora of items and being able to get back to things quickly and keep them properly organized, because when you go to put something back, it knows what it is you pulled out, and yeah, it's got a scale right there, so everything is weighed and checked, and just helps to keep things running smoothly.
Yeah, a lot of people don't really consider consider the fact that tooling becomes and when I say tooling, I mean things like end mills and whatnot, becomes a significant challenge when you're inventory challenge when you're working at this scale, and making sure that you have enough of the item in stock. So you need to make sure that if you're using a half-inch carbide end mill, that you have enough of them around to be able to actually do work on a regular basis. And when they get worn, because they do wear after, depending on the material that you're working in and the tolerances that you're working to and the surface finish that you want, then they need to dispose of them, but you need to make sure that there's enough of them available on hand at any one time. So these kinds of systems are critical for keeping track of how many tools you're going through, how quickly you're going through them, being able to order them automatically so that they can make sure they've got enough stock of a particular tool so they don't get shut down. Many years ago, I worked on an inventory control system for that was used a lot by large electrical and plumbing suppliers, and one of our customers at the time was a parts supplier for General Motors, and in this case, they were actually supplying tools to the shop floor, and that was crazy dealing with that system, because again, it's the same kind of idea. Now in this case, the vending machine was a complete building complex a couple of miles down the road from the factory, and they had hundreds of thousands of tools available that they could supply at any time to the factory floor. But that flow of tooling from one place to another was critical to keep the factory going.
Mm-hmm. The setup they have at Rolex is absolutely incredible. It reminds me a little bit of the sequence in The Matrix where decides he needs some guns, and, and all these guns come flying out of nowhere. That apparently at the actual main factory where they do the assembly work at Rolex, if a watchmaker happens to need a part, they can key it in when they start running low, or if they need one in a jiffy, and the average turnaround time for a robot to deliver a part through the delivery system is under 8 minutes.
Under 8 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible.
Yeah, well, when you think about the sheer number of things they're organizing, it is absolutely incredible.
They must have hundreds of thousands of items in their SKUs. Like that must be that would be unbelievable to try and maintain.
And thousands of people working. Like it's just unreal.
The Santa Fe Symposium is held annually in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's the premier collaborative forum for jewelers and professionals in jewelry-related fields. Bench jewelers, manufacturers, lapidarists, metallurgists, casters, educators, and many more take part in this multifaceted event. The symposium was founded as a non-commercial, not-for-profit gathering for professionals willing to freely share their research, challenges, solutions, and innovation. By attending, you will come away with practical know-how you can put to use in your own work. Each year, 24 papers are presented across an exemplary range of jewelry-making endeavors. Attendees receive a copy of the proceedings book, as well as a USB drive with the presentations. Attendees form new relationships, strengthen existing bonds, and build their professional networks with colleagues from around the world. The Santa Fe Symposium offers incredible benefits that last throughout the year and into the future, and the benefits grow stronger each year you attend. Longtime listeners of the show will be familiar with some of the fascinating places I've visited over the past year, including tours of the Goldsmiths Company, Cookson's Gold, and Birmingham City University. Those visits are all thanks to the relationships I've built from attending the Santa Fe Symposium. The Santa Fe Symposium is one of the few must-attend events of the year for me, and I hope you join me in Albuquerque next year. The 2019 Santa Fe Symposium will be held May 19th to the 22nd. Visit santafesymposium.org today for more information on the lineup of speakers and how to attend. Along with information on the upcoming symposium, you can also find papers from previous years. While visiting Dr. Frank Cooper at Birmingham City University back in September, I was introduced to Dr. Anne-Marie Carey. Dr. Carey presented a paper to the symposium in 2013 on rediscovering the Cheapside Hoard. The Cheapside Hoard is the greatest cache of Elizabethan and Jacobean jewelry in the world. It was discovered by workers in 1912 who were demolishing a 17th century tenement building. The paper discusses how Anne-Marie and her colleagues used the latest digital technology, as well as their experience as bench jewelers, to analyze some of the pieces found in the hoard. 4 pieces are presented in detail in the paper, including an Elizabethan watch. You can find this paper and hundreds more at santafesymposium.org.
Now, somewhat tangential to the jewelry trade was the tumbling machine that they had there for tumbling some larger aluminum parts. This absolutely the largest tumbler I have seen in my life, and it wasn't running when I was there, but I was told when it does run, you can feel it all within a good radius around the room where it operates. You can feel the floor rumbling. It's absolutely massive. It's made by a company named Walther Troll, and just huge. I mean, if you want to toss in a couple parts from an airplane, you could probably have them come out nice and shiny.
When I was at the Santa Fe Symposium 2 years ago, I went on a tour of the Rio Grande facility because they manufacture a lot of their own parts. And one of the places that I found impressive was their finishing area, because they have a huge selection of vibrating tumblers. Now, they're not this size. They're not the scale that Lee Valley's using, obviously, because the scale of their parts is very different. But it was the same kind of thing there. They were in production. They were actively manufacturing pieces, and it was impressive, the vibration coming out of that part of the facility.
Mm-hmm. This is the only tumbler I've ever seen that I could climb up into and go for a swim in if I wanted to. Not that I'd want to.
I can imagine at the scale that Lee Valley is producing pieces, hand finishing is just not an option. They need to have automated manufacturing like this, or automated finishing like this to some degree.
There's plenty of hand checking along the way. And actually, hand finishing isn't completely out of the question. There was a gentleman who was chamfering the holes out of every piece that he was pulling out of one of the automated lathes as we were walking by. Haas was very well represented as far as their multi-axis CNC machines went. I would say that they were the dominant brand there in the back of the shop, where they have most of their multi-axis systems running, and along with some old Fanucs and a Matsura from Japan.
Yeah, I've heard through a few people that I know locally that that they've been doubling down on the Haas equipment that they have, which I found interesting because a lot of the Haas equipment it's sort of entry level manufacturing. It's still really good equipment, but from a manufacturing point of view, it's a little bit entry level. And when you start looking at some of the like Matsura equipment and things like that, where they're designed to be loaded with pallets and left unattended for 72 hours, that kind of thing. Those kinds of machines now are starting to become more and more common in these kinds of manufacturing facilities. So I was a little surprised because I don't think Haas has that kind of pallet system where you can sort of load up 20 or 30 pallets or whatever and then let it run for a couple of days at a time.
Yeah, run a factory in the dark.
Yeah, exactly. Because that of course is one of the key things. You want your spindle staying running as long as possible. So if you can have this changeover time between pallets to be as short as possible because the machine is handling it, and then the operator can take that pallet off and take the parts off at sort of at their leisure, then your spindle can continue running as long as possible, or as large a time as possible during the day. So yeah, it was interesting when I heard that they were buying more and more Haas equipment for their shop.
I can understand why, given the scale that they are working at, because they're using a lot of the machines for multiple different purposes. So they don't have necessarily a dedicated purpose for a given machine in terms of the particular tool that it'll be churning out. It'll be, 3 weeks churning out this part, 3 weeks churning out that part, a week churning out this part, and so on. So they're not producing at the sort of scale that you would see for tools and whatnot coming out of, say, China or Japan or the Taiwanese market.
And one of the advantages of these unattended machines, though, is that the pallets don't need to be the same job. So they'll often have a 500 tool changer on the back of it for tool. So when a tool wears, there are 10 copies of that tool in the tool library. And then each pallet can actually be a completely different job. They don't need to be the same thing. So you could actually run 3 different planes and, some gardening tool all on different pallets in the same batch, and the system can handle that. So, there are a lot of those manufacturing facilities or manufacturing centers now are designed to be able to handle that change up of tooling. So,
yeah, the change of tooling is not as big of an issue. But I never really thought about having it switch up programs partway through as well. But that's absolutely feasible. It's just shuffling bits. Well, on sort of the opposite end of the automated spectrum, an interesting, very small tool that I could have just walked right by. Something called a Tapmatic.
Yeah.
Which mounts in a drill press. I had never seen this before. So this is something you're familiar with?
Oh yeah, the Tapmatic is great. I've thought about getting one for my shop, and in fact, they've got, I think, the modern Tapmatic. They also have tapping arms, which are, if you think about the articulated arms that you would have a lamp on, for instance, how you can pull it and put it in different positions, and they have a product that has a powered tapping head that goes onto an arm. And so you can sit there and put your workpiece down on a table, and you basically just use this tapping machine to go into each of the holes that you need to. But the nice thing about these Tapmatic units is that they've got a clutch system inside of them, so that when the tap hits the bottom of the hole, it automatically reverses the direction of rotation. So you're not going to snap your tap, and it will go in automatically, and then it'll come back out automatically, which is great. Saves you a huge amount of time and saves you a lot of broken taps, particularly if you're tapping a large number of holes and pieces. And I know some of their some of their fixtures and whatnot that they sell have a huge number of holes in them. So if they had to manually tap those, then that would take forever.
I mean, a Tapmatic's certainly nowhere near as automated as a Matsura or a Haas would be, but it's quite automated in that it takes care of all the headaches and issues that could pop up in tapping for you. I mean, not all of them. You still got to apply lubrication and whatnot. But yeah, you don't have to worry about breaking a tap off while you're tapping a hole. And for the listener who might not be familiar with what we're talking about or referring to here, this is basically just preparing holes for a screw to be screwed down into. So you take a round metal hole in a plate that you've drilled, and then this particular Tapmatic was mounted in a drill press. And then using this drill press, you can just push the Tapmatic down into that hole, and it will automatically take care of making the threads to receive that screw absolutely perfectly for you. It's just a really ingenious piece of technology. And I was dead set on getting one after just seeing it as well. And then I have just quickly discovered how much they cost, and I can't quite justify it.
Yeah, they're not the cheapest thing on the planet, and $1,000 will get you a Tapmatic, and you can get them in different for handling different size taps. I've considered getting one because, again, for sort of $1,000, you can turn an inexpensive drill press into a very fine tapping machine. You know, again, that ability to adjust the clutch so that it's not going to snap the tap as it's working is so critical. There's nothing worse than snapping a tap in the middle of a part that you've already spent dozens of hours working on, because then you either have to scrap the part or you have to figure out how to dig that tap out of the part that you've just finished working on. So, anyways, yeah, these Tapmatics are beautiful. I've thought about adding one to my shop, but I just like you, I haven't been able to justify buying a new one yet.
Mm-hmm. Now, a very manual operation that they still do there, which freaked me out a little bit looking at it, is I mentioned Dual earlier as the manufacturer of the auto crib for the vending of various parts. It is ancient bandsaw made by Dual for cutting through metal, and attached on the side of this bandsaw was an equally ancient machine for welding the bandsaw blades together to be put into the machine. Because chewing through metal, you're gonna chew through blades far quicker than you're going through wood and whatnot. And I would think it would be more economical just to have pre-made blades done up, but apparently not. So they have this little welder on the side there, and I'm not sure if it was an arc welder or what it is, because I didn't see it in action. They basically put the two ends of the blade in, pull a Frankenstein lever, and it welds it together. And
yep, that's exactly what it is. It's just a little induction welder, and it welds the two parts of the blade together.
I mean, this thing was a beast. Not sure I'd want to be around when it's in action. Just knowing, I've seen a few bandsaw blades go in my day, just working with wood, and I would not want to be around when one goes working on metal.
That's actually a very common thing to have on bandsaws, and you can go into Busy Bee Tools or somewhere like that, and actually, or go to King Canada or whatever equivalent, and you can find high-end bandsaws that have welders built into them. Even today, so that's actually quite common, and it's they're used all the time. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about the quality of those blades after they've been welded together, because they're actually quite strong.
Perhaps it's just the ancient appearance of this particular one that was throwing me. Reminds me of an old demagnetizer that I have that basically just takes electricity straight from the wall and runs it through two metal strips with a button on top, and you can watch the electricity arc between the metal strips as you bring them closer together. Not a tool that I make use of anymore. It was inherited from an older watchmaker. So they have plenty of automated mills around the shop too, mostly feelers and Hercos, and of course the multi-axis CNC machines that we talked about. But they did quite a number of older machines. And while I didn't get to see it at one point, the gentleman touring me around, gestured off to a far-flung corner of the shop and mentioned that they have a particular lathe on hand here, and their shop that was used to machine Terry Fox's prosthetic leg that he ran across the country on.
Really, I didn't realize that they were involved in that. I'd never. I mean, I remember Terry Fox's run across Canada when I was a kid, but I didn't. I didn't even think about who had manufactured that prosthetic, because I imagine at the time there weren't a lot of companies doing custom prosthetics. Certainly not that could handle what he was doing.
To the best of my knowledge, the leg that Terry Fox ran on wasn't actually manufactured by Veritas or Lee Valley. They came to acquire the lathe after the fact. Because Lee Valley was founded in 1978, and that would have been their mail order business that was running out of the basement of a strip mall. And I don't think they were into manufacturing at that point. And Terry Fox ran across the country just 2 years later. So I don't think those historical arcs quite meet, but every tool tends to have its well, I shouldn't say every tool. There are tools out there that have their stories and their lore that come along with them. And for this particular one, it happened to have been acquired from a machine shop that had created Terry Fox's leg.
Yeah, that's kind of fun. I've been fortunate to know the backstory of a couple of my machines, and it's always nice knowing what previous life they had. Yeah, and for a little bit of context, Terry Fox was a Canadian who was a double amputee thanks to cancer that he had, and he decided to run across Canada in an effort to raise awareness and money for cancer research. And unfortunately, he didn't make it across the country, but it was it certainly gripped the entire country when he was doing it. So it was quite a cultural event here in the country. I don't know how far outside of Canada that story reached, but inside of Canada, you couldn't escape it. It was quite a powerful sort of cultural event inside of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going back to the lathe setups that they have, you said that they have a number of Swiss lathes for doing small parts. I assume that they have sort of more generic lathes, like larger ones doing, presumably Haas lathes doing sort of the larger parts that they have as well.
I don't know that I saw any Haas lathes per se. I can't remember the make of the lathes that I came across. Although in mentioning what you have, it brings up another neat thing that I saw there. They have a number of grinders made by a German firm named Gokel, and the way that the parts are mounted in their fixtures on these grinders is that the bed is basically a giant electromagnet, and if you align the particular metal alloys on the fixtures that the bottom of them are laced with, line those up with the lines on the bed and flip a switch, all of a sudden the fixtures are all locked in place. So it makes it very easy to quickly secure a large number of items in place to do a grinding pass and work on the pieces in that way. I think they grind as many as a couple hundred chisels at a time on these machines. It's impressive.
Yeah, using magnetic chucks like that is very common in grinding operations because the forces that are involved are significantly lower than in turning or in milling. Although occasionally you do see people using magnetic chucks in milling. That always terrifies me when I see that. And I've seen people using magnetic chucks on lathes, which also terrifies me. Yeah, I'm not sure that I'd ever want to hold a workpiece on a magnetic chuck in a lathe, but there certainly are chucks out there designed for lathes that are magnetic chucks. But yeah, using a magnetic chuck in grinding is a very common operation. You can easily put a large number of parts down on magnetic chucks. They'll hold pieces in ways that you can't easily hold otherwise. One of the arts of doing sort of surface grinding or any kind of grinding is making sure that your pieces are blocked properly so that they don't go flying when the grinding head comes in contact with the piece.
Yeah, not something I'd ever come across in the much smaller manufacturing processes I'm more accustomed to.
Especially considering you want to avoid making your watch parts magnetic at all costs. So it wouldn't be the kind of thing you'd want in and around a watch.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked quite a bit about industrial CNC machines this episode, and you recently gave a presentation with friend of the show, Rich Lowen, on making your own CNC machine. Do you care to share a little bit about how that went?
It was a good talk that we had at Maker North a few weeks ago. Rich and I spent probably a bit too long talking. We were there for probably 2.5 hours, and we had maybe a dozen people show up to discuss the ins and outs of building your own custom CNC machines and answer people's questions about how you can build your own custom machines to do the specific type of work that you're looking for.
Well, it sounds like the talk was well received, so I'm sure it's something you guys will more than likely be doing again in the future. And to the best of my knowledge, you recorded that as well, so be sure to link to it once it's released on the YouTubes.
We did record it. We filmed ourselves doing that. I don't know how the audio quality was. We were, I think that may be a little suspect, but we did record the talk. And as I said, the talk was about 2 hours long. So hopefully Rich can turn it into something that's a little bit more compelling than the original. We've also been asked to come back in the new year to Maker North to give the talk again. So we'll make sure that everybody knows about that, both when the video becomes available as well as when we do that talk again. Our thanks to the Santa Fe Symposium for sponsoring this episode of Off Hours. Please visit santafesymposium.org for more information.
Thanks for listening to Off Hours. You can find detailed show notes at offhours.show. If you'd like to keep up to date with the show, follow us on Twitter @offhours. John can be found on Twitter @UnderTheLoop, and Chris can be found on Twitter and Instagram @silver_hand.